coming into the hot seat, as it were. This discussion is not contentious. This discussion is perhaps one of the most pertinent for so many families in the region. And it's to do with the inclusivity of schools and the inclusive nature of our schools and how it's our responsibility to cater for all children, of all ability, of all need, and of all ranges of diversity. But it still is perhaps one of the most difficult type of conversation to sometimes have with parents. And I'm delighted this afternoon to be joined by a panel of experts, some who I only ever see once a year, like Bruce, where we sit in a panel together every 12 months. But it's good to see you again. So I'm joined, first of all, by Robert Ellis from EIS, Jumeirah. Bruce Major, who's the principal at Vernus International School. B. Bogon. Now, that's an unusual name. I'm going to have to inquire as to where that name comes from. Really unusual, beautiful name. Who's head of inclusion at Uptown International School. And Hayley Oxley, who is my head of inclusion at Heartland International School. So welcome to you all. Looking forward to the conversation. The topic specifically is, how are schools in the UAE supporting children with additional needs? And let's deal with that question first. What are we doing? What are we doing well? And indeed, what could we do better? But how are schools supporting children? So I'm going to start with the ladies. I'm going to start with B, and I'm going to start down that end. Just initial thoughts, really.
So this is my third year in the UAE, and what I would say...
B, will you put that microphone just very close to your mouth? There's some sort of a interference or feedback of some sort that's happening.
Hopefully everyone can hear me. Okay, so this is my third year in the UAE, and what I've noticed is a collaboration between schools. Schools are networking, they're sharing resources, we're being supported by KHDA in terms of network meetings, schools are sharing resources. We also, when we look at KHDA, they have a separate framework for inclusion, which they expect schools to abide by. And that is very different to some of the schools across other countries. So KHDA are ahead of the game. In terms of strategies, we also need to remember that in terms of the UAE, we have over 200 different nationalities. And by having lots of us, if you look at the panel, a lot of us are from different backgrounds, and we can share that collaborative strategy with each other. And that's what's helping the UAE to be very inclusive and very forward-thinking with their approach.
I thought it might have been me that was doing the feedback. I've now realised it's a musical production that's happening over in the corner with drum kits and everything else kicking off. So we're just going to have to talk about it. Hayley, same question to you, really. You know, what are schools doing and what are schools doing well?
Yeah, absolutely. Following on from B, schools are doing so many amazing things, and it's great that we are being held to account by the KHDA. And I've been here 10 years, and from my entry coming in and to now, the progress that has been made, and there is still, you know, a way to go as well, but the community coming together from a strategy piece is fantastic. Moving into that kind of more individual state of what are individual schools doing, that comes down to starting with the management and the leadership and what that school's vision is and what they want to do and what they can do with the skill set they have. The inclusion teams throughout Dubai and the schools are really wide and varied. We've got great skill sets. Some schools have really specialist provision with regards to dyslexia, autism, certain units within that they've combined with therapy centres. Some schools really invest in the teaching skills, and I know at our school we're really, really lucky that we have a really, really skilled inclusion team, people from different backgrounds, and trying to meet the needs of the children. And that's where it is. Each school's strategy will be based on the cohort and the intake that they have and what the vision and the inclusivity of that school is. And I think the challenges for some schools as well is that you can't be all things to everybody, and every teacher and every inclusion department and every principal wishes we could cater for every student. But what we have to do is do the best by the students that we have in our school and the skill set of those teachers to deliver the highest level of provision.
Bruce, over to you.
Sure.
Your thoughts on the same topic?
Sure. To echo the response of these young ladies, it definitely is beneficial for the support that we get from KHDA when it comes to inclusion. But I think it also starts with each individual school and their admissions process. Having an inclusive environment having a commitment that all students will learn, not necessarily that all students can learn, but if the school is committed to the success of all students, students at the low end of the spectrum or students at the high end of the spectrum, that are talented and gifted, that your school is committed to that level of inclusivity. That's really, really important, because without that, then it leads for things to go off rail really quickly in any aspect of it. So I think that commitment to for all students to be successful has to be there, and is. I've seen it develop in Dubai, and it's there for schools that have that philosophy that works there. And I think it's really important that also trickles down from an administrative perspective of how we support general education teachers and how they support students that learn differently. That we have to ensure that our that we're not segregating our students to just our SIN programs. No offense, our SIN inclusion directors here, but that our general education teachers have the same high level of awareness and support for our students so that they have the full integration into the school community.
I can see Hayley nodding. Now, you've just touched a nerve there, so I can see that one. Robert, your thoughts on the same question?
Yeah, to echo some of the things that Bruce has just mentioned, really, about, KHDA have pushed all the schools to be truly inclusive. And for me, one of those things is actually getting the students in the classroom, rather than in other countries that I've been in, where students who have specific needs are often taken out of the classroom and are going to special schools. There's a real push within Dubai to ensure that they come into some mainstream, at least some mainstream, if not all mainstream. I know at ours, we don't have a centre, and all our students go into mainstream classes and are supported through that environment. So I think that's really important. The one thing I would add is actually the connection to external opportunities for parents as well, for treatment outside of school, I think is fantastic here. And I know that a lot of those companies are making better links with schools so that we can actually offer together the entire package required for each and every student that matches their needs. I think that's a really good thing, that we're now mixing properly with the outside agencies around. And it's not something which is controlled by local government. This is sort of a real interaction between Senko's inclusion teams and clinics which actually really serve their population.
It's interesting from a parent perspective, having been a parent of a boy who was diagnosed with a very specific learning difficulty. I remember receiving that diagnosis when he was in year 6, and it actually genuinely almost felt like a bereavement. I felt I had done something wrong as a parent, somewhere I hadn't supported my child. What's the roles of our inclusion teams to make sure that we really do support our parents? Because it's dark water for them initially to go through until they themselves understand, and we as schools. B, I'm going to start with you again, just because you're sort of nodding there profusely at me. How can we help parents charter those new waters and new challenges that they face in relation, perhaps, to a diagnosis?
So I can speak about Uptown School, and I'm sure it's similar with other schools. We have a very arm around the child approach. So from the moment that the child comes into admissions, from the admissions point, they will meet with our fantastic admissions team who are on board, and we've done some specific training with them with indicators for them to look out for. They also have accessibility to either myself or anyone from the inclusion team, so that they're given a tour and they're given a choice of the facilities that we've got at school. But then we walk them through the process, and we take them at a pace that is relevant and suitable for them. So one size does not fit all, but we make sure that we have a bespoke service that caters to where they are. Because as you've said, Fiona, for some parents, they're a bit more accepting. Others are a lot further on the journey. And it's about us making sure that we're differentiating the support so that we're able to take that parent and that family on the journey that's right for them at that period of time.
Bruce, you're ready to jump in on that one?
I had extensive opportunities to kind of experience what you've experienced, having been a licensed school psychologist for the last 26 years, that sharing that information with parents of students who have a disability, my approach and the approach of our inclusion team is not necessarily focusing on the disability itself, focusing on what are the strengths and weaknesses of the student, but what are the expected outcomes. Developing shared outcomes for that student's success tends to be a better way to kind of bring that parent, that family into a collaborative situation for doing what's best for that student. So you could be learning disabled, you could be cognitively disabled or attention focusing disorder. You know, it's not about the label itself, it's about so what? What do we do as a school in order for your student to be successful? What do we do collaboratively as a school and a parent, as a family, for your student to be successful? And I see that to be a much better way to have parents buy into and invest in the success of their students.
Hayley, your thoughts on that, picking up on the same theme?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it back to when you were mentioning regards to receiving that diagnosis. There is an incredible amount of work and time and partnership before you would even get to that point. So when you're working with a family and you're working with these children, if an inclusion team do identify and do see something, the initial conversations are taken very slowly. And as you said yourself, you take it at that parent's pace and that family's pace. Everyone comes from a different background, and whether you're coming from one country or another, the process there is different. So coming into our school, the process would be explained to the parents. But also, by the time it came to us maybe saying, actually, we do need an external therapist, we do need somebody else to come in to identify if there is a barrier or a challenge there, it wouldn't be something new. It wouldn't be something that is just suddenly put upon them. That would have been weeks and months of worth of support and provision and put in place before then the parents are ready and on board to take that next step. So obviously, if they do then decide to do that, coming back then, if they get that diagnosis, then we have the other support team put in place there. We have our school counsellors. We have our inclusion team, who they would have been very familiar with anyway, to help and guide them on the way and to say that the outcome isn't actually a negative, isn't a barrier. What it is, it gives us an idea of how we can further support the child and how we can really help them to reach their full potential because we understand them better. And that's what a diagnosis is all about, is how we further understand these students to then enable them to reach their full potential.
Thanks, Hayley. Robert, I'm sure you concur with everything that's been said, but anything to add to that? And then I'm going to start you off with a newer contentious question in a second.
I completely agree. I think these are not like a sudden illness that you wake up one morning and suddenly you are on the spectrum. There's a huge amount of work that's gone via the inclusion teams, starting with the class teacher first and working with that parent. So it should never come as a shock. You know, it's not something that we're just throwing out at people. This is a huge amount of work that's come before that.
I'm just going to open a bit of a challenging question that you won't have prepared for. But if I think back to coming to the UAE myself 15, 16 years ago, it was very monocultural in some ways in terms of the expat community. But it also wasn't particularly diverse, and it certainly wasn't an inclusive education system. Thankfully, KHDA absolutely have pushed that agenda, and absolutely they have made sure that this country is now an inclusive country for all children in terms of an educational framework. What's next, do you think? What is it maybe that we still need to work on to get better as schools, Robert, to make sure that we're genuinely more inclusive, genuinely more diversive? And how can we support parents? Because if your child is diagnosed, particularly with something very specific, it can be a very expensive world to enter into in this part of the world.
I think, Fiona, you just hit the nail on the head. It's the fees, it's the expense. You know, once somebody's had paying school fees, then they're paying for an LSA maybe, or paying to be in part of a centre, going off for therapies, going for psychological therapies, which psychologists here, or psychological therapies for children is really, really expensive. And I think all those services for children outside of a school, we need to get some sort of subsidy for parents, because they're paying double, sometimes double, sometimes even more in terms of their fees to access the therapies that a child really needs to reach their potential.
I know that the new Director General of KHDA, Her Excellency, was with us earlier this morning, and certainly I know that they are listening and having these discussions, and very much not necessarily looking at a social services type of framework, but absolutely having discussions about inclusion, which is a great place for us to be. Bruce, your thoughts on that?
Sure. I think there's two main areas of next steps for this region. The first would be alternatives. Dubai is a very academic-laden area, and for students who can't be successful in traditional academic environment, what are we doing to focus more on functional life skills, providing activities and services and education for students that just guarantees more success in life outside of an academic area? So just a functional life skills type of environment. And then I think there should be our next step should be a greater focus on post-secondary outcomes for students with disabilities. So what happens to the students that may not be prepared to enter a collegiate environment, a college or university? What type of vocational aspects, or again, any life skills things, or things that they can sustain themselves as an adult that can be available to them? And so I think that's kind of two of the main areas I see as next steps for this region.
Yeah, and I'm sure there aren't any educationals who would disagree with you in terms of those next steps. Hayley, you've got the mic in your hand from your duo at the end. Your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, completely agree. My initial thoughts when that question was raised was the further education, the next steps. These students who, for example, in GCSEs or A-levels or moving to that next step, what is it? What can they do here? What services or what industries are they able to go in? And it's working with possibly those big companies out here, those big industries are saying, we've got these children who are absolutely fantastic, but the next step for them is not an academic step. They need that hands-on, that vocational experience. And who's going to open up? Who's going to help them take that next step? And who's going to nurture these young men and women to then move to their next steps of their education or their career? Another part for me is more just developing that parent awareness and parent support, because having those really clear guidelines, there are guidelines in place and there are support, but there are different little pockets here and there, and I think depending on who the parent speaks to, they then get a certain guideline or a certain route to go to. And if that was slightly more formalised for parents, where they could fully understand a very clear process and all of their options, that would maybe help them identify the correct provisions sooner, because we are having conversations with parents who've possibly gone from one school to another, or suddenly just found out about a certain support that might be right for their student, and just maybe collating that a bit better for them, and so then there is a clearer path for them to go, rather than having to search for several months and then eventually finding the right provision or right place for their child.
B, any further thoughts on that? I know we've had lots of ideas. Anything to add to that? And
I would say that we've started that journey because we have places like My Maximus, where some of our students of determination, I know from Uptown, they've gone from being through an IB school and now working at My Maximus Centre, and that's been fantastic. You can see the children from nursery all the way through to grade 12. So I can see that Dubai's on that journey, but having more providers like My Maximus Centre would be good. Maybe looking at university pathways for our students, because some of them, yes, some of the traditional degrees may not fit some of our students, but what other alternatives are there? There are also qualifications from across the world that we're using in our schools, such as ASDAN, but making sure that we can get that accredited, because a lot of us run these programs in school, but we can say that they're UK accredited, but they're not necessarily recognised by KHDA. So that's one thing that I think that we should be looking at, and I know a lot of us as inclusion leads, we're really advocating for that at the moment.
So it's interesting that we've sort of presented to you in these scenarios some of the challenges that schools are facing and the things that we would like to see change. Here's the lowball final question then, and one that you've got to be prepared for. Time and time again, we see it on social media, we see it on chat groups, we see it on things where my child has been refused entry to a school because they have a special need. They have an identified special need. Can schools refuse to take children? And if they can you help explain to parents what are the parameters under which that happens, and why do schools make those decisions? And then what are next steps for a parent who's just been turned down by a school and told there's no place at the inn? Hayley, I'm going to throw you under the bus first because you work for me. And we've had this discussion again and again, so I sort of know what the answer will be, and that'll give everybody else thinking time. Be you're next, okay? So I'll come up the line this way.
Thank you. we would personally never refuse a child based on their need. It's not about what needs they have, it's about can we provide, what are we able to provide for that child. So, for example, let's take it back to admissions. If an admissions comes onto my desk, I look over those admissions and I speak to the parent first of all, because what's written and what happens in the real world, there can be a real disjoint. And so when we're speaking to those parents and when you're meeting that child and then you're fully understanding what that child needs, and for example, the child might need A, B, C, D, a certain level of provision. And as a school, we will then go back to our team and have a look and say, what can we provide? In an ideal situation, we will be able to provide everything they need. And at certain times, you actually aren't able to provide what that child needs. And by saying yes and welcoming them into the school, you're actually doing them a disservice. Because what you want to ensure is that you are meeting that child's needs who's going to come in. And so having those conversations with parents and saying, look, this is what I can honestly provide for you, but your child actually needs this other part of provision that my school at this moment in time may not be able to provide, but your school actually might be able to have that provision and have that allocation. It also comes down to your cohort that you also have in your school. We have a duty of care to those students that we have in our school, to those families, to those partnerships that we've made, and we've already made promises, we've already built relationships to develop a certain level of provision. And actually, it's really hard sometimes. You can't be all things to everybody, and as much as we would love to, and as much as I would love to welcome everybody in, and I'm saying to the teams, come on, we can manage this, we can get this other child in year 2. And then they coming back to me and saying, okay, Hayley, but we've got this much provision, this many teachers, how then do we cater for this student? So you don't refuse a child based on their need. It's a real big jigsaw puzzle, and you have to ensure that you're honestly speaking to parents and saying to them, this is our level of provision at the moment, and deep down I actually think that your child may need a different level of provision, and we'll be doing them a disservice. And when it comes to that point of maybe saying we're not the right place, it's not just saying we're not the right place, it's saying, but I do have, the Inclusion Network is wonderful. We can pick up the phone to another school and say, do you have anything? Or, well, I've got a child who has this need, and you may have a space. Are we available? And we try and help them and signpost them on that journey. We wouldn't just say we can't and not help otherwise.
Okay. B, your thoughts on that same topic?
Sorry. Similarly, we have a team around the child approach, so it wouldn't necessarily just involve the inclusion lead, it would involve the heads of school, the family, the student themselves. The first and most important thing is making sure that the student comes to the school, and it's like buying a house. You want your child to come to school, have a look at the school and see if the school is suitable for the child as well, and whether they're happy with the provision. Once all the introductions have taken place, then you can ask the parent if there is a diagnosis, if they're willing to share that with you. And just remember that the family is on that journey. They may not want to share all the information with you, so you can only use the information that's been provided to you. I think, as you've already alluded to, if you speak to a head of inclusion, we want to take everybody on. If I use our school as an example, we have at least 2 children per class who receive one-to-one support. And it's really hard as an inclusion lead to say, we're not able to offer a place at the moment and explain why. Because we are an all-inclusive school, we've got over 47 children who have one-to-one support. But that's where the networking comes in. Inclusion is a family, so the inclusion provision at Heartland and Uptown, we all work, we all know each other, that if we can't offer a place at our school, we will then reach out to another school and we'll make sure that that child has a place. So we won't say, well, we haven't got a place for you here because of whatever reason, and just leave the family. We will support that family on that journey, because as inclusion leads, we want to make sure that every child matters and every child is provided for.
Bruce?
So I definitely agree with the sentiments that's been shared. I think what I would add to it is to say, and this goes back to the earlier questions, what are some next steps we can do in this region? And that is build stronger partnerships with external therapists and different organizations and agencies. I think it's not about school refusal and saying we're denying you admissions. It's really coming to that conclusion that we don't have the capacity to deliver a level of service that your student needs. And I think as we build those collaborative partnerships and agreements with external agencies and providers, I think schools are in a better position that we'll able to accept those students. They can have benefit from all the other aspects of school while they are gaining what they need in a therapeutic sense.
Robert, I'm sure a lot of it has been said, but your thoughts, anything different that you have to add to that?
No, just really echoing what's been said. That process at admission is really, really important. Sometimes it's not about the school saying no, it's about the parent and the school getting together, and between them, the school is saying, well, this is what we can do, but this is what your child needs. And within the discussion, realising that this is not the right environment for that child. It shouldn't be really about the school refusing. It's just an acknowledgement that we're not the right place. There are some times, though, from an administrative point of view, as B said, where we simply don't have the space. And that's really unfortunate because we desperately try and squeeze everybody in, but then that also harms the provision for your child and other children in the school.
I think, B, you picked up, you said something in passing there which was really important, which is particularly where you have children with a level of one-to-one support. Having more than 2 children with that level of support in any one classroom means that the proportion of adults in the room starts to become more of a challenge, particularly if you have a teaching assistant as well. Suddenly I have 4 adults in a room or 5 adults in a room, and it changes the dynamic of learning for other children as well. So sometimes schools do have to make tough decisions. I'm conscious that there may be some questions from the floor. Let me try that first and see if anybody on the floor has got a question in relation to this topic. You're all such a compliant audience. You really have been all day. In which case, what I'm going to do is I'll start with Robert. I'm just final thoughts on the topic of inclusion, final thoughts on, particularly the challenges that parents face, with the challenges that schools sometimes have to face as well. But just about your thoughts on inclusion generally, anything that hasn't been shared so far.
I think the thing is to realise that actually our inclusion leads are absolutely amazing. There's a massive network, they're getting together, they're sharing, they're training each other, they really communicate well. So if there are any concerns, go and see your inclusion lead or go and ask to see the inclusion lead during admissions and sit down. They are incredible people who will give you the best information and the best advice, whether that be that your child is coming to that school or not. They will take you through everything that you need to do, and they will lead you through the whole process and support. I know our inclusion lead is still in contact with parents who are at other schools maybe, some of them, or they're still trying to find their way, and they're still offering that support. Go to the inclusion leads because they are amazing people.
Just when Robert said that, I just looked down and I saw B and Hayley look at each other and go like this. So you definitely did the peacock feathers on the 2 of them down at the bottom. So I let them finish at the end. Bruce, your thoughts on that?
Sure. My final thoughts on it is just that it's important for parents to focus on what provisions of service that you will receive, and deciding on what school that your students should attend. I wouldn't focus on the particular curriculum or any of those types of things. What can that school provide for your student to be successful? Don't worry about diagnoses. Don't worry about any of those different things. It's all about how can your student be successful? And can that school work collaboratively with you in order to ensure the future success of your student? That has to be paramount in your decision and in your quest for finding school placements.
And now I will go to the 2 inclusion leads, who are the amazing people that Robert said that they were. B, final thoughts from you on this topic.
I actually switched the mic on properly as well. I just wanted to reiterate that inclusion is a massive priority for all schools and for KHDA. If you look at the inspection reports, the first thing that you see is the rating for inclusion across the schools. That's how much of a priority inclusion is. Inclusion is in a good space. You've got fantastic inclusion leads, like Robert has said already. But most importantly, you have principals who support these inclusion leads to make sure that the provision is in place. They do challenge us to healthy challenge to make sure that we're providing that outstanding provision for your children.
I think just the final thing for me as parents is be open and honest. When you're going through that admissions process, if you do have a diagnosis, I would really encourage you to be open and honest, because the schools that are willing to help you and want to support, and there are so many, they wouldn't shy away the fact that you have a diagnosis. So be open and honest from the moment you go into that school, because those are the schools you want to be in. Those are the schools that you want your child to be in if you're open and honest, and they can start that journey with you. And it just helps as you enter that school, start that building that relationship.
It's always going to be an emotive topic. It's always going to be one that's going to be high on the agenda. And as Bruce said, it's one that certainly needs to remain on the agenda in terms of the future. I think we're filled with promise based on the work that's already happened in a short number of years, and the future certainly looks bright in terms of inclusion. Can I thank this afternoon Bruce Major from Venus International School, Robert Ellis from Emirates International School, Jumeirah, Hayley Oxley from Heartland International School, and B. Bogle from Uptown International School. Your expertise has really been appreciated this afternoon on a very sensitive but highly important topic. Really grateful to you all. On behalf of the School and Nursery Show, a huge thank you to our panel. In about 15 minutes' time, we will start the final panel of the day. And that final panel is here we really go into the nether regions. We're talking about artificial intelligence and education. So we're talking about next steps and Star Trek. Here we go. So thank you so much to this panel this afternoon, and we'll see you back here in about 15 minutes.